Hello, cloud leaders out there in the metaverse and universe and internet and everywhere. This is the Cloud Show, and today we're going to go back to a topic that we have talked about once before, but now with another star, another guest. We're going back to the topic of AI, or more specifically, open AI, what that is about. And we're going to talk to a gentleman who has long experience in Azure and in IT industry, and who's now running a startup about open AI. And it gives me a lot of pleasure to introduce today, as the star of the Cloud Show, Mr. Vishwas Lele. Vishwas, so good to see you.
Great to see you, Magnus. Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, it's my pleasure. It's such a treat to have you on the show. For those of out there who don't know, we're both Microsoft regional directors, and we have been friends for a good long time. And it's such a treat to talk to all my friends about various interesting topics. Tell me first, who are you and what do you do?
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to introduce myself. So my name is Vishwas. As you said, I work for a company called Applied Information Sciences. I've been building applications like you, Magnus, on Azure for a long time. And yes. I'm also, like you, regional director in Azure MVP.
Yeah, that's brilliant. It's been such a long road now, and Azure has been sort of a front runner in Microsoft for a long time, and now everything is just spelled AI all the things, right? And it's funny to see that, because I always keep saying that there wouldn't be any kind of AI without the cloud. So, I'm not bitter. All right. So tell me, you're running a startup. Is that correct?
Yes. And I just wanted to clarify, I continue to be, I've worked for this company called Applied Information Sciences for the longest time. I think of Azure OpenAI, and really, really fortunate for people who have been developing in the Azure ecosystem for the last decade or so, right?
Yeah.
ChatGPT comes out, GPT 3.5, whatever, November, end of November, really catches the imagination of people. And then guess what? A few weeks later, that capability is available to people as a service within Azure, right?
Yeah.
So I can go to ChatGPT and put some proprietary data, because it is a public service, and I know that they're talking about ChatGPT Enterprise, which we'll get to maybe later on in the show. But when you look at the capability of the underlying models, and you say, oh, this is available to me as another Azure service, right? So I just go provision this.
Yeah.
And everything that I've learned as an Azure developer, you and I, all the things about protecting our network, right? Making sure whether it is private link, yes, storing the data in blob storage, right? And you need a vector database, of course, for language models to do some kind of semantic search. Oh, well, guess what? Azure Container Instances or AKS clustering, you drop a vector database. Now, you have all of the elements for people who've been doing Azure development. For them, creating an enclave to do this language model stuff is a breeze, right? And that's what got me started. So, like many others, I joined the preview when it became available and started playing with it, and really came upon this use case. So alongside my job, and it's hard to sort of run a startup within the company, because there are always conflicts in terms of resources, talent, and all that. But we've been able to do that, and the idea is very simple. The idea is that, of course, I live in Washington, D.C. area. There is something called the federal, and this is going to sound like a fancy word, Magnus, Federal Acquisition Regulation, which is like anytime the government buys anything, they go through this big procurement process.
Yeah, I know about those, yeah.
Every country has a different name for that, or
absolutely,
you may also call it RFP. But those documents are lengthy, like 50, 100, 200-page long requirement documents, and then you have to respond to them. And when GPT-4 came out, not so much GPT 3.5, when GPT-4 came out in March, it just seemed to have that comprehension to understand the nuances of detailed questions, right? And we said, okay, can we write for people like me who are not good writers, but are dragged into these meetings about how do you respond to this? What kind of solutioning goes in? I can do that. I can have a whiteboard session, but then coming back and trying to describe it is a challenging thing, right? So we said, okay, why don't we try to build an engine which will generate the first draft? And before people, audiences run away and say, "Oh, you're building cheating as a service right now. You're generating a response." And and let me clarify, and I'll stop here for a second, because it is not a cheating as a service. Why? Because we are constraining the underlying model to only generate response based on your past knowledge, your architecture diagrams, your architecture reviews. So, take all of the, let's say you've done this 100 times, you've written these great architectural documents and all of that. You store them into a knowledge repository, and then tell ChatGPT or GPT-4 in this case, you are not allowed to use your general intelligence to go out to the outside world. You're only allowed to answer these questions based on the information that I've given you.
Okay.
So we started doing that for ourselves. And then we said, okay, that is of interest to other companies. And I've taken an interesting approach, Magnus, which is okay, built an MVP. And we said, okay, before we put more features into it, let's just get 10 or 12 outside customers and sort of have them try it. So we are calling it a co-pilot for proposal writers.
Oh, yeah.
Right. So that's
okay. That's very cool. So that's I can see how that can be useful if it is focused enough. It can't just go make stuff up from the internet. It needs to be relevant and clear. So about this co-pilot, you mentioned co-pilot. I think that a lot of people have heard the term co-pilot. If you're in the Microsoft ecosystem, you could not possibly have avoided to hear Microsoft say co-pilot. Every other word that Microsoft says at any conference and any announcement and any presentation is, oh, we have a co-pilot for that. What is a co-pilot?
Yes, you're right. That term is being used quite a bit, and there may be some overdose of co-pilots already.
I think so.
But let me sort of demystify that for the audiences, right? Think of co-pilot. What we are talking about is we are not replacing proposal writers, or we are not replacing claims adjusters, right? We are augmenting them. So this is why they're not calling it autopilot, or not, they're not calling it pilot, right? They're calling it co-pilot. So the idea is, think of co-pilot as a system that can assist you in doing your work. Let's take an example of Word. You're staring at you've been asked to write a status report about something that just happened in your organization, and there was a big meeting about that, and you've been asked to write that. We all have to do that constantly, right?
Sure.
So the co-pilot is that you can say, hey, co-pilot, and this co-pilot is not yet available, right? M365 co-pilot is not yet available. So I don't know when it's going to be available, but based on the demonstrations that Microsoft provided at Build at and other conferences, what you could say is, hey, I need to write a summary of the key decisions that happened in this meeting, and I want to provide you an update. And oh, by the way, go to that OneNote folder where all the brain dump of that brainstorming session that happened. Just go there. From there, pick out some interesting points about the developments, and sort of give me a version. And now the co-pilot has done this work of, if you wanted to, you could yourself go to that OneNote, get it, run it through an AI model, summarize it, and paste it back. But the co-pilot is doing those things for you.
So it's processing a large set of data and creating a reasonable summary or a first draft or something that makes sense, so that you can maybe you as a human or as a whole team of humans maybe don't have to manually do the same work.
That's right. It is doing that orchestration for you, and it's doing it in a manner that is security sensitive. So let's say I had two OneNote folders there, right? One is for, just making this example up, one is for all the team members, and one has some financial information that is only available to a certain category of employees. right?
Yep.
Now, if I ask the Copilot, by virtue of being a developer in this case, I don't have access to that financial portion of the
Right.
conversation. So it will security trim me. It will get back the information, which is technical details and things like that. It will summarize that information. Somebody else comes in and says, okay, you guys had a good discussion. What is the financial impact of that discussion or a change on my project? Go now. I'm coming in with a different persona, a different role model. I can now access that OneNote folder, and I can be able to do that. All of that in a security compliant manner, getting all that orchestration. I really think that Copilot paradigm makes a lot of sense. Of course, there's an overload, as you said, but we are all trying to be. I mean, I hear a lot about, there's a lot of views about what AI can do and the bad things that can happen, and there's certainly a place for that discussion. If we don't pay attention to that, all the ethical issues, the biases, of course, we have to work on those. But there is also, let's also not forget that there is this aspect of augmentation, the work that we do, so that we can focus on. Imagine if I could complete this task of writing a summary about this key meeting in 15 minutes versus 1 hour that it takes me to write because I'm not a good writer. I can go do something more interesting with that time.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just realizing that the film Erin Brockovich wouldn't actually exist today. Like they would just take all the data and run it through a Copilot, and the film would be over. It'd be 5 minutes. Interesting. Okay, sorry. Yeah, right. So if we know like what's the value of it business wise of having something that can write a proposal draft, for example. We know what kind of an engine it's called, a Copilot, but how would you do it as a company if you wanted to build something? You want to build your own Copilot and whatnot, or your own. You have your own idea. You have lots of data, and you need to process it using AI. Azure OpenAI is what you are using, right? Correct.
That's
how does that? What is that about, and how do you get into it if you haven't? If you wanted to take advantage of that?
Right. That's a great question. So I just want to repeat your question to make sure I understood this.
Yeah.
Okay, so Azure OpenAI is a great service, but how do I integrate with my data? Ultimately, it's all about integrating with the enterprise data. So great question. And really, there are two patterns that have emerged in terms of, the M365 Copilot, no problem. It's going to look at the Microsoft graph. It's going to look at all of the standard sources and give you don't have to do any integration. They'll do that for you.
So basically all my contacts, all my emails, all the meetings we've had, and all the files that were attached to everything, and basically just look at the whole thing and give me some smart things from there.
That's right. But I think your question is bigger than that. Your question is, hey, my data lives in line of business applications. I have a claim system. I have a sales system. I have a policy system.
Exactly. Yeah. I have inventory, perhaps. I have there are many things. Yeah. Right. Different systems. Yeah.
So there are two patterns that come into play. So you write an ARM template or Bicep template to go provision this whole Copilot stack. Right, and there was if people want to know, there's a great talk at the Build conference about the Copilot stack. So you write an ARM template, which will go get you an API endpoint for Azure OpenAI service. It'll provision the blob storage and all that. It'll provision, if you need a vector database, you will provision all of that. So you write an ARM template to do that. So once you've done that, now let's talk about how would you integrate that data with your, let's say, some line of business application. And let's just take the inventory example that you mentioned, right? Yeah. And there are two ways of doing that, right? One is this whole plugin approach, right? So the language model, if you ask it a question that it does not know the answer to, you can register a plugin with that, okay? And basically you are, at the time of registration, you are saying, hey, language model, you know nothing about my inventory, okay? If you get any question about the inventory, you need to make this API call. That's what a plugin is, right? So once again, all of our knowledge of API management comes into play. You use API management. And what will happen is you basically describe the API. Let's say you had some backend API that fronts your inventory system, you put it in front of API management, and now you register that as a plugin within OpenAI model,
Yep.
right? And now when somebody asks an English language question saying, hey, what are the inventory levels for product 1, 2, 3 as of today, right?
Right.
The language model say, I know nothing, but let me scan through all the plugins, and there is a semantic match with this plugin, and I know the API, and I'm just going to do my best to sort of invoke the API on your behalf, right? And it will make the call to the inventory. Inventory will come back with, let's say, a JSON representation or something.
Yeah.
The language model is smart enough to take structured information and convert that into human readable text. It will say, hey, the inventory levels are at 90% as of this for this product. Right.
And with the current, the current rate of purchase, it's going to be out like
Exactly. So what I want to understand is all the tools that we as Azure developers have been learning, right? ARM templates, API management. All you're doing is writing this API, registering it with language model.
Yep.
The other pattern that we commonly hear, so one is the plugin pattern.
Yep.
The other pattern is something called the retrieval augmented generation, or RAG pattern, where what you do is you go to the language model and say, I want you to architect this solution, and let's just make up some solution. I want you to create a one-page architectural definition of this web app I'm trying to build, and here are the constraints, right? I've been told to use a NoSQL database. I've been told to use a certain model of NoSQL database. I've been told to ensure that the traffic between my services is not navigating the internet. So you can provide it all of the requirements that are coming. You are providing that context, and that's what retrieval augmented generation is all about. Language model will not know. You can't just say, build me this internet application. You might have to provide it certain things, and it will then, based on the context that you've provided, it will then come back with a response. So your job as a developer is to get that context from somewhere, and that context could be hidden in SharePoint, could be in a database. You make a call yourself, you form a question, but you say, in addition to the question, here is the background for you to work with. Those are the two patterns.
Brilliant. So at a higher level for the executive or for the manager who's maybe not a developer, with a developer background, essentially you can have data in many different sources, and it's possible to plug them together using an API, plug them into the language model, and then take advantage of that and combine various things with each other and do all kinds of smarts with that.
That's right. That's exactly right.
That's cool.
It's just fascinating that what you can do. I've been working with this for almost 8 or 9 months, and it still amazes me in the kinds of responses it comes back sometimes, right?
Yeah, I agree. I've heard some stories, and I've seen some answers myself that are just actually mind-boggling and phrased in such good language that it's like, okay, I couldn't even write that. I do okay with my English. God, I mean, I'm Swedish, but I'm okay. But it comes back with formulations and like language and syntax that is just really, really good. So we're almost out of time, but I'd like to maybe have time to ask you like a final question here. And this one is about the prospects of working in this field. It's an exploding field right now. What the heck is an AI engineer, or is that a real job, and is that a career move, and what do we do here?
Yeah, that's an excellent point, and something I've been thinking about. And I should, before I respond to your question, this is early days. This is just my thinking based on some reading. Obviously, we'll see how it plays out.
Yeah.
But if you look at before generative AI became such a dominant thing in the conversations, we were all doing, I hate to use the word, we were all doing regular AI, right? And, it was all
classic AI.
The classic AI. At least I didn't call it legacy AI, right? I said it's the regular AI, right? There was a learning curve to regular AI, right?
Sure.
You needed to understand the algorithms, right? You need to have some understanding of, okay, I know the data scientists were doing some of that, but even you as somebody who wanted to work in that field, you need to understand at some level, well, how are the deep neural networks working? What is the transformer architecture? I mean, you had to have that understanding of, how do is this a labeled data set, unlabeled data? You needed to know all that, right? And those people will be continue to be required. What generative AI and open AI has done essentially, in my mind, Magnus, you know this better than most. When we started working on the cloud, it was not clear what kind of role is going to be the most important one, right?
No.
It became very clear that people who are good at infrastructure as code, people who could do observability, people who they did well. I mean, those are the most jobs that got created.
Yeah, but technically it wasn't clear from the beginning, because technically infrastructure as code doesn't specifically have anything to do with cloud as such.
Yes.
Except all clouds use it, but it's not the same thing.
Right. And those jobs are the big, in my mind, at least from my purview, those are the people who got started with infrastructure code, people who started doing observability. They had lots and lots of things to, then it became multi-cloud, then you have to learn Terraform, all of that. There's so much body of work. If I sort of take the experience from that, and if I had to advise somebody about how they can be productive in this area, then there are very similar tools that you need to start learning to be, if you want to take advantage of that wealth of jobs that we created. And that could be the term AI engineer includes things like the following, right? You may want to, first of all, your knowledge of automation and setting up an Azure OpenAI enclave continues. That's an important one.
That's important, yeah.
That's
just
more
baseline knowledge. Yeah.
Then you have to think about orchestration, right? Remember, I was talking about, you make an API call, this goes there. So orchestration, so things like LangChain, things like semantic kernel, and understanding of that, where you're combining these systems, that becomes important. Just understanding prompt engineering. How do you write prompts? How do you shape them? So and then we are very familiar with the observability tools. Now, similarly, we need to worry about observability tools like Fiddler AI, things like that, right? So if you take a collection of these skills, I think there will be a wealth of jobs in this area to be created. And by the way, no MLOps requirement here, just these skills.
Just these skills. Brilliant. That's a good summary, and it's going to become more clear what an AI engineer, if that's even going to be, I don't know. It's going to become more clear. Anyway, this has been brilliant. It has been so good to have you with us, and I think we made a couple of key points about OpenAI and AI and all these things kind of a little bit more clear today. I hope so. Thank you for being with me today on the Cloud Show, and that's the wrap.
Thank you.